Before we settle in tonight, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy these explorations through history's forgotten chapters. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your world. It's always fascinating to see our global community gather here. Now, get comfortable, maybe dim the lights, grab something warm to drink, and let's drift into tonight's hazy journey through time together. Cannabis is one of humanity's oldest companions. Long before governments argued about it, before dispensaries opened on street corners, before anyone called it marijuana or weed, this plant was simply there, growing wild across Central Asia, waiting for humans to notice it existed. The discovery probably wasn't dramatic. No ancient philosopher had a eureka moment while staring at hemp. More likely, someone around 5,000 years ago was walking through grasslands, saw an interesting plant, and decided to see what would happen if they set it on fire. What happened, of course, was smoke. Thick, fragrant, mind-altering smoke. And humanity, being humanity, immediately became interested. The earliest archaeological evidence of cannabis use comes from burial sites in what's now Siberia and Mongolia. People were placing cannabis seeds and burned plant material in graves, suggesting the plant held spiritual or medicinal significance. Either it was considered sacred enough to accompany the dead into the afterlife, or someone really wanted to make sure their ancestors had a good time in eternity. At first, cannabis wasn't about altered consciousness. It was about survival. The fibers were incredibly strong, perfect for making rope, clothing, and fishing nets. The seeds were edible and nutritious. The oil could be used for lamps. Cannabis was essentially a hardware store in plant form. You could build with it, wear it, eat it, and burn it for light. The psychoactive properties were likely discovered by accident. Perhaps someone threw cannabis stalks onto a fire for warmth and noticed that breathing near the smoke made them feel unusual. Suddenly, the clouds looked more interesting. Conversations became profound. And that rock over there definitely seemed like it was listening. Early humans had no framework for understanding intoxication. They didn't know about THC receptors or cannabinoids. What they experienced felt mystical, possibly divine. The plant didn't just affect the body. It seemed to open doors in the mind. This accidental discovery set cannabis on a path that would take it across continents, through empires, and into nearly every major culture in human history. From shamanic rituals in the Asian steppes to medical texts in ancient China, from Hindu temples in India to medieval Islamic courts, cannabis quietly accompanied human civilization wherever it went. What makes this story remarkable is not that people used cannabis. It's that they used it for everything: medicine, spirituality, industry, recreation, and even warfare. The plant adapted to human needs, and humans adapted their cultures around the plant. So before the modern debates about legalization and regulation, before cannabis became political, it was simply a gift from the natural world that humans stumbled upon and never quite let go of. By the time organized civilizations emerged, cannabis had already been in human hands for millennia. But it was ancient China that first wrote it down, turning folk knowledge into formal medicine. Enter Emperor Shen Nong, a semi-mythical figure known as the Divine Farmer, who allegedly lived around 2700 BCE. Shen Nong was either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless, depending on your perspective. His method of discovering medicinal plants was simple: taste everything and write down what happens before you die. According to legend, Shen Nong personally tested hundreds of herbs, carefully documenting their effects. Some healed, some harmed, some did both depending on the dose. And somewhere in that catalog of botanical experiments was cannabis. His text, the Pen Sao Ching, one of the oldest medical documents in existence, lists cannabis as a treatment for pain, inflammation, gout, rheumatism, and absent-mindedness. The irony, of course, is that cannabis can also cause absent-mindedness, making it both the problem and the solution. To ancient Chinese physicians, cannabis wasn't recreational. It was serious medicine. They brewed it into teas, ground it into powders,
and mixed it with other herbs to create complex remedies. The goal was balance, aligning the body's energies and restoring harmony. Chinese medicine operated on the principle of yin and yang, opposing forces that needed equilibrium. Cannabis was considered cooling and calming, useful for conditions marked by excess heat or agitation. Fevers, pain, insomnia, all could be addressed with carefully measured cannabis preparations. What's important is that this wasn't casual use.
Dosage mattered. Timing mattered. The Chinese approached cannabis with the same seriousness they applied to acupuncture or herbal formulas. It was a tool, not a toy. Beyond medicine, hemp became essential to Chinese infrastructure. The fibers were woven into clothing strong enough to last years. Paper made from hemp allowed scholars to record history, philosophy, and poetry. Ropes held ships together. Fishing nets fed populations. In a very real sense, ancient China was built partially from cannabis. The same plant that eased pain also clothed people, connected ideas, and enabled trade. Chinese physicians also noticed that cannabis affected people differently depending on preparation and dosage. Small amounts relieved symptoms. Large amounts caused confusion and strange visions. This awareness led to careful regulation within medical practice. Healers knew the plant's power and respected it. Interestingly, cannabis was also used in Taoist rituals. Taoist monks burned it as incense during meditation, believing the smoke helped them communicate with spirits and perceive hidden truths. Whether this was spiritual insight or simply the effects of THC is open to interpretation, but the practice persisted for centuries. What ancient China understood, perhaps better than many later cultures, was that cannabis was a spectrum. It could heal or harm, calm or confuse, depending entirely on how it was used. That wisdom, written down thousands of years ago, remains relevant today. While Chinese doctors were carefully measuring cannabis into medicinal teas, the nomadic Scythians of Central Asia had a very different approach. Burn it all and breathe deeply. The Scythians were a fierce, horse-riding culture that dominated the Eurasian steppes around 1000 BCE. They lived outdoors, fought constantly, and apparently believed that death rituals needed more atmosphere, specifically cannabis smoke. The Greek historian Herodotus, history's greatest gossip, wrote extensively about Scythian customs. He described how they would construct small tents, throw hemp seeds onto red-hot stones inside, and seal themselves in as thick clouds of smoke filled the space. According to Herodotus, the Scythians would then howl with pleasure, which is ancient Greek for they got extremely high and enjoyed it. This wasn't a quick ceremonial puff. This was full immersion. The Scythians treated cannabis smoke like a spiritual sauna, staying inside until the experience peaked. For them, it wasn't about medicine or industry. It was about connecting with the dead, easing grief, and possibly seeing things no sober person could perceive. Archaeologists later discovered golden vessels in Scythian burial mounds, ornate and beautifully crafted, with residue still clinging to the interior. Chemical analysis confirmed it. Cannabis. These weren't decorative objects. They were ancient hotboxing equipment, buried with their owners so the ritual could continue in the afterlife. The Scythians didn't see cannabis as dangerous or taboo. They saw it as sacred. The smoke was a bridge between worlds, a way to honor ancestors and commune with spirits. Death was not an ending, but a transition, and cannabis helped navigate that passage. Other nomadic cultures noticed and copied the practice. From Persia to the edges of India, smoke rituals began appearing in funerary rites and religious ceremonies. Cannabis became associated with transformation, mystery, and the unknown. What's striking is the confidence with which the Scythians used cannabis. There was no hesitation, no moral debate. They simply accepted that the plant had power,
and integrated it fully into their spiritual life. Modern archaeologists continue to find evidence of ancient cannabis use across Central Asia. Burial sites, temple remains, and ceremonial spaces all show traces of burned plant material. The Scythians weren't outliers. They were part of a widespread tradition that saw cannabis as a tool for transcendence. In a world without written doctrine or rigid religious institutions, cannabis offered direct experience. You didn't need a priest to interpret. You simply entered the tent, breathed deeply, and let the smoke carry you wherever it would. The Scythians understood something profound. Ritual doesn't require belief alone. Sometimes it requires altered perception, and for that, cannabis was unmatched. By the time cannabis reached India, it had already been medicine, rope, and spiritual incense. But in Hindu culture, it became something more: divine. Around 1500 BCE, cannabis appeared in the Atharva Veda, one of Hinduism's most sacred texts. It was listed among 5 holy plants, described as a gift from the gods meant to free humans from anxiety and bring them closer to enlightenment. The deity most associated with cannabis was Shiva, one of Hinduism's principal gods. According to legend, Shiva discovered cannabis under a celestial tree, consumed it, and entered a state of profound meditation.
From that moment, he became known as the Lord of Bhang, which remains one of the most excellent religious titles in human history. Bhang itself wasn't smoked, it was drunk. Imagine a thick, spiced beverage made from milk, crushed cannabis leaves, nuts, and honey. It was consumed during festivals, religious ceremonies, and moments of spiritual seeking. Priests drank it to deepen meditation. Yogis drank it to endure extreme ascetic practices. Festival goers drank it to celebrate life and temporarily escape its burdens. Unlike alcohol, which was often forbidden in religious contexts, Bhang was explicitly encouraged as a sacrament. The most famous occasion for Bhang consumption is Maha Shivaratri, the great night of Shiva. Devotees stay awake all night, chanting, dancing, and drinking Bhang in honor of the god. The experience is meant to dissolve the ego, quiet the mind, and allow direct communion with the divine. What makes India's relationship with cannabis unique is its total integration into culture. It wasn't hidden or controversial, it was openly celebrated. Temples sold Bhang, holy men carried it, families prepared it for festivals. Cannabis became part of India's social fabric in a way it never quite managed elsewhere. It was simultaneously sacred and ordinary, powerful and familiar. Indian texts also recognized cannabis's medical properties. Ayurvedic medicine, India's traditional healing system, prescribed it for pain, insomnia, digestive issues, and even anxiety. The same plant that brought you closer to Shiva could also help you sleep through the night. Importantly, Indian culture distinguished between different preparations. Bhang, made from leaves, was mild and socially acceptable. Ganja, made from flowers, was stronger and reserved for serious spiritual practice. Charas, a form of hashish, was even more potent and used sparingly. This careful categorization showed respect for the plant's power. Cannabis wasn't treated carelessly. It was measured, prepared with intention, and consumed with awareness. Even today, thousands of years later, Bhang remains legal in India for religious purposes. During certain festivals, government-authorized shops sell it openly. The ancient tradition continues, unbroken, because it was never criminalized in the first place. India didn't just use cannabis. It elevated it to the realm of the sacred, proving that a plant could be both intoxicating and holy without contradiction. While India celebrated cannabis openly, ancient Persia approached it with philosophical curiosity. By the time cannabis reached Persian territory, it had already accumulated centuries of reputation. Persians, being Persians, wanted to understand why. The Assyrians, predecessors to the Persian Empire, called it kanubu, a word that sounds suspiciously like cannabis,
because it essentially is. They burned it in temples, not casually, but as part of formal religious ceremonies meant to bring worshippers closer to divine truth. When Zoroastrianism emerged as Persia's dominant religion, cannabis found a place there too. Zoroastrians believed in cosmic dualism, the eternal struggle between good and evil, light and darkness. Fire was sacred, representing purity and truth. Burning cannabis on sacred fires was believed to carry prayers upward and purify the mind. Persian mystics and philosophers also discovered that cannabis made long conversations about metaphysics significantly more tolerable. Discussions about the nature of reality, the structure of the cosmos, and the meaning of existence became less abstract and more immediate when accompanied by fragrant smoke. But Persia was also a practical empire. While mystics debated philosophy, merchants were trading cannabis along the Silk Road. Doctors were prescribing it for ailments, and craftsmen were using hemp fibers for textiles. Not everyone approved. As Persian society became more organized and hierarchical, authorities grew suspicious of anything that made people too happy without official permission. If citizens could reach enlightenment on their own, what did they need priests and rulers for? Cannabis began its long career as a controlled substance, respected in private, condemned in public, and still widely used despite official disapproval. Persian traders carried cannabis westward into the Mediterranean and eastward into China and India, creating a network of exchange that spread both the plant and knowledge about its uses. Along these routes, cannabis picked up new names, new preparations, and new cultural meanings. By the time it reached the Islamic Golden Age centuries later, cannabis had become hashish, a concentrated form that was stronger, more portable, and significantly more controversial. But Persia's contribution wasn't just spreading the plant. It was adding intellectual weight to its use. Persians treated cannabis as a philosophical tool, something that could unlock hidden understanding or reveal uncomfortable truths.
In Persia, getting high wasn't escapism, it was inquiry, and that distinction mattered. When cannabis finally reached the Mediterranean world, it encountered a culture obsessed with logic, debate, and categorization. Ancient Greece. The Greeks didn't invent cannabis use, but they did what Greeks always did. They wrote about it, argued about it, and turned it into a philosophical problem. Greek physicians like Dioscorides documented cannabis in their medical text, noting its effectiveness for pain, inflammation, and earaches. They recognized it as a legitimate therapeutic tool, though they approached it more cautiously than their Eastern counterparts. Greece's relationship with cannabis was complicated by their love of wine. Dionysian culture celebrated intoxication through alcohol, which was socially acceptable, ritualized, and central to Greek identity. Cannabis, by contrast, was foreign, exotic, and slightly suspicious. Greek writers like Herodotus documented the Scythian smoke rituals with fascination and mild disapproval. The Greeks admired the Scythians' toughness, but found their cannabis practices excessive. It was the ancient equivalent of saying, "Interesting choice, but not for us." Still, cannabis circulated quietly through Greek society. Soldiers used hemp for wounds. Scholars mentioned it in passing. And in certain mystery cults, substances including cannabis may have played roles in initiating new members into hidden knowledge. What Greece contributed wasn't widespread use, but intellectual legitimacy. By including cannabis in medical texts and philosophical discussions, Greek scholars ensured the plant would be remembered and studied, rather than forgotten as folk superstition. Greece also represented a cultural turning point. East of Greece, cannabis was sacred, medicinal, and celebrated. West of Greece, it would become increasingly controversial, misunderstood, and eventually criminalized. The Greeks stood at that boundary, neither fully embracing nor fully rejecting the plant. And in that ambivalence, they foreshadowed centuries of confusion to come. Rome, being Rome, took what Greece tentatively explored and turned it into industry. When the Roman Empire absorbed Greek territories, cannabis came with the conquest. But Romans were practical people.
They didn't care much about mystical experiences or philosophical inquiry. They cared about results. Hemp became essential to Roman infrastructure. Ropes for the navy, sails for merchant ships, cloth for legions, all relied on cannabis fibers. The Roman military machine, which conquered half the known world, did so partially with equipment made from the same plant people were smoking elsewhere. Roman physicians continued Greek medical traditions, prescribing cannabis for pain, gout, and various ailments. The famous physician Galen documented its uses extensively, ensuring the knowledge would survive into future centuries. But Romans also noticed something uncomfortable. Cannabis reduced pain, but also reduced motivation. Soldiers using it for injuries sometimes became less interested in fighting afterward. This was problematic for an empire built on constant warfare. As a result, Rome's relationship with cannabis remained utilitarian. Use it for rope? Fine. Use it for wounds? Acceptable. Use it for pleasure or spiritual exploration? Suspicious. Roman expansion carried hemp cultivation across Europe. Wherever legions marched, hemp fields followed. The plant spread not through spiritual movements, but through military and economic necessity. This pattern would repeat throughout history. Cannabis as industry was always acceptable. Cannabis as medicine was usually tolerated. Cannabis as consciousness exploration was always controversial. Rome didn't change cannabis, but it changed how cannabis spread, turning a sacred plant into a strategic resource. And with that shift, the groundwork was laid for everything that followed. The medieval period's confusion, the Islamic world's embrace, the Renaissance rediscovery, and eventually, the modern world's endless debate. Cannabis had traveled from Central Asian steppes to Roman aqueducts, from shamanic tents to imperial warehouses, from sacred ritual to mundane commodity. The plant remained the same, but humanity's relationship with it would never stop evolving. The story of cannabis is not a story of one discovery, but thousands. Every culture that encountered it found something different: medicine, rope, sacrament, or pleasure. Some worshipped it, others industrialized it. A few tried to eliminate it entirely. What makes cannabis unique in human history is its persistence. Despite changing laws, shifting morals, and countless attempts at control, the plant survived. It survived because it was useful, adaptable, and apparently deeply appealing to the human mind. From prehistoric burial mounds in Siberia to modern dispensaries in California, cannabis has accompanied humanity through every stage of civilization.
It has been legal and illegal, sacred and profane, medicine and menace, often simultaneously, depending on who you asked. The ancient world understood something modern society is only now rediscovering. Cannabis is not one thing. It's many things depending on context, dose, preparation, and intention. The Scythians used it to honor the dead. The Chinese used it to heal the sick. The Indians used it to reach the divine. The Greeks debated it. The Romans industrialized it. And through all of that, the plant simply grew, patient and persistent, waiting for humans to figure out what they wanted from it. Perhaps that's the real lesson. Cannabis didn't shape human history. Humans shaped their relationship with cannabis, projecting onto it their fears, hopes, needs, and contradictions. The plant just kept growing, as it always has, as it always will.